I don't remember exactly how old I was at the time, maybe 14 or 15. I had this really crazy guy that lived on my street. Everyone called him Crazy Mike, and he really was as crazy as you could imagine. But more on him in a minute. I had this one friend that was a little wild. Let's call him Charlie. He was kind of the adventurous friend that got me to do some crazy stuff. We went through a phase I have about 2 or 3 months where we hung out a lot, and it was honestly a lot of fun. One of the things we would do is explore the nearby woods. There was a lot of wildlife, and anyone could go out there and explore as far as they wanted. We lived on a mountain, and we would hike up the mountain, and when we had enough for the day, we would hike back down. We normally took the regular roads back down because it was just a little bit easier to get home that way. My friend lived a few roads up from me, so I would walk to his house with him and then go home by myself. I remember this one particular day we had gone hiking through the creek. Bear in mind, it was freezing outside at the time. There was snow on the ground and a lot of the water was frozen. At one point, we had the bright idea of walking on the ice. As you might imagine, we fell into the water. It wasn't very deep or anything, not even enough to get above our chest wet, but we were dripping with water. And it was about 5 degrees outside, and there was snow on the ground. But being the crazy kids we were, it didn't stop us. We just continued hiking even after we got soaking wet. I don't know if we just had a really high tolerance to the cold or it was adrenaline. We were all good. We continued on for a couple hours that day, but after a certain point, I finally talked him into heading home for the day. He agreed, and we went out and got on the road. We made our way back down like usual, but this is the point when I started freezing. I was too cold, and I knew my body. I knew that I was in some kind of danger, like getting near hypothermia or something. When we got to my friend's house, he was more than willing to let me come in and warm up for a few minutes. But just as we were getting to his house, my mom called me. She was really angry with me because I hadn't answered my phone in an hour. I tried explaining the situation to her, but she just screamed at me over and over again to come home. So I had to walk the rest of the way home, and that was that. This is where Crazy Mike comes in, because he lives one road above me, and it saves me about 10 minutes of walking if I cut through a part of his property to get to my house. He had a big fence, but so did his neighbor. There was a small walkway kind of area between the two spots. I was obviously in a rush to get back home and warm up. In fact, I was jogging most of the way. I hadn't heard anything about Crazy Mike by that point, so I figured it would be okay if I cut through his property this one time. I started going through, and that was when he came out of his house with an assault rifle. He pointed it at me and started screaming at me like a maniac. Of course, I turned around and sprinted away. I ran all the way back home and told my mom. She thought I was exaggerating and that I shouldn't have been cutting through people's property anyway. That was when I started asking people around the area about him. I heard some stories about Crazy Mike and some of the things he would do. I heard that he was a conspiracy theorist, drug dealer, criminal, felon, and a bunch of other stuff. If I had to sum it all up in a single phrase, a bad guy. Whoever I asked never had anything good to say about him. And the part that freaked me out was that I still had to pass Crazy Mike's house on my way home. I didn't have to cut through his property, but I did still have to walk in front of his house on the road to get to my house. And that made me uncomfortable, because now I was constantly worried that I was going to get shot or something. I still would go hiking with Charlie and all that, and after a couple of times of going home, there was no incident, so I thought that was going to be the end of it. However, I noticed something else. He had video cameras on the outside of its property looking out onto the road. I had never noticed them before, but now that I was aware of his insanity, I paid a little bit more attention. Whenever I walked by, the cameras would follow me. What freaks me out the most was that they were manually operated cameras. They weren't the kind of cameras that just follow motion around. He was sitting there operating those cameras every single time I ever walked by, watching me. I'm not sure if he was recording all the footage or not, but he made me uncomfortable either way. I remember there was one time when I was walking home from Charlie's house at night. It must have been 10 or 11. It was really late. And even then, the cameras followed me as I walked by. I thought that was going to be it, that nothing else was going to happen between me and Crazy Mike. Well, I was dead wrong. It was still during that same winter season, and I was walking home during a blizzard. That was just the kind of guy I was. My mom was going to order pizza that night, and I didn't want to miss it. I passed by Crazy Mike's like I always did. And that was when something unexpected happened. He had this giant fence, and it had to have been 15 feet tall, and it was this really thick wood. Part of it opened up, and a dog ran out after me. I couldn't tell what kind of dog it was, but it was angry and barking at me really loud, and ran after me, and I could tell that it was going to bite me as hard as it could. I got a seriously violent vibe from that dog. I was lucky that I was in really good shape and managed to sprint away. Didn't slip or anything else either. That situation could have turned really bad really fast. Anyway, my family ended up moving a few weeks later for unrelated reasons. My mom actually got a new job in a different state, so that was the end of my experience with Crazy Mike. And even now, I wonder what his problem was. Was he some kind of drug dealer or criminal? Why was he so paranoid about some kid walking in front of his house or cutting through a piece of his property? I've asked my friend on Facebook a couple of times if he's heard anything about Crazy Mike, and apparently nothing has changed. So make of that what you will. I guess the moral of the story is that you should avoid crazy people as much as you possibly can. Sometimes just walking in front of their house is enough to set them off. This isn't actually my story, but it happened to a friend of mine. Actually, it was two friends of mine, and the entire situation was my fault. So my one friend, Steven, was someone I played Xbox with a lot. We went to the same school, but we only had one class together, and it wasn't a class where you could really talk to anyone. The teacher was really strict. So we pretty much just played Xbox together sometimes, mostly Halo or Call of Duty. If I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't really know him all that well. I mean, I thought I did, but I really did not. The other friend of mine is a girl. Her name was Brittany. She was in our grade, and I was friends with her. Sometimes we texted or hung out in class. She was one of those really eccentric people. I remember her posting a whole bunch of funny memes on my Facebook wall. Some of them were mildly inappropriate. Luckily, my mom wasn't friends with me on Facebook, so nothing bad happens to me. But I thought it was a great thing. The world is already dull and gray. Some people had just a little bit of color. Anyway, I had added Steven on Facebook. Like I said, we only really played Xbox together, and it was over a year into our friendship that I even realized he had a Facebook account. I guess guys don't really care that much about being friends with other guys there. Who knows? Well, he noticed Brittany's memes on my Facebook wall, and he asked me about her on Xbox one day. Naturally, I didn't think anything of it. In fact, he wasn't the first person to ask me about her, but I told him that I was friends with her and everything else. He asked if I was going to try and ask her out. I explained to him that I wasn't interested in her like that, and I just wanted to stay friends with her. And that was pretty much the end of the conversation. The next day, though, he added Brittany on Facebook. After all, we did all go to the same school, so I didn't think it was that weird. That was when Brittany messaged me and asked who this guy was. I explained to him that he went to our school and that I played Xbox with him from time to time. This all started going on around November, and the funny thing is that we had a crazy blizzard that year. We were out of school for like 2 weeks, and it was the 2 weeks right before Christmas break, so everyone was celebrating. It was a Christmas miracle. It gave all of us plenty of time to text and play video games. And it was during all that free time that Steven started acting weird. He started asking me weird questions about Brittany, and I just kind of figured that he had a crush on her. After all, if I'm going to be honest, she was a very pretty girl, and I couldn't have blamed him. I also knew that he was kind of an awkward guy, so I just didn't think anything weird was going on. I specifically remember one day when we were playing Halo. We were having a really good time, but in the middle of a game, he said he had to get off. He just turned his Xbox off and left. And right before he did, he just said in a really hurried voice that he had to leave. I was doing really well that game, and we were playing with 2 other people. I just kind of brushed it off and continued playing. The next time I saw Steven was when we went back to school after Christmas break. I saw him by the lockers. I asked him what he had been up to, and he was looking at his phone. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that his phone wallpaper was a picture of Brittany. I thought that was kind of weird, but but he turned it off and put it away before I could get a really good look at it, so I just chalked it up to me seeing an optical illusion or something. And I already know what you're thinking. I know that I'm naive and I didn't see any of the red flags, the many, many red flags, but I can't change how I acted. It was also around this time that Steven started talking about her all the time. I guess he had gotten her number somehow and they started texting each other. And here was the weird part. He would text her while we were playing video games. And he always got so excited when she texted back. It wasn't very often, and I kind of got the vibe that she didn't really like talking to him. But whenever she did, I would hear his phone make this weird sound. He had a frog sound effect as his text ringtone for some reason. Don't ask me why. And whenever he heard that frog, he would giggle like an idiot. It was really weird. Fast forward a couple of days, and Brittany texted me out of the blue. She asked me if I could give her a call because she really needed to talk to me. I had no idea what it was going to be about, and I gave her a call thinking it would be something serious. And it was. She asked me what was wrong with Steven. She told me everything. He was obsessively texting her and calling her and messaging her on Facebook. And here's the worst part. The time that he got off of Xbox really fast in the middle of a game, she was getting off Xbox to go to her house. She didn't invite him, though. He invited himself to her house. I guess he had gotten his mom to start driving him to Brittany's house, and Brittany told him that she wasn't even home. I don't know what he told his mom, or how he even got her address. It was the freakiest thing. Brittany didn't know either. She said that he got really mad after that. And she didn't understand why either, especially because she didn't even invite him over, or give him her address. He was literally stalking her hardcore. Of course, she blocked him. The next time he was on Xbox, I invited him to a party and asked him what he was doing. But he pretended like nothing happened. When I pressed him about it, he said that she was being a female dog and a prude. This was the point when I stopped playing Xbox with him. I just wouldn't accept his invites and started appearing offline for a couple of weeks. After a while, he got the hint. Brittany told me that she came really close to calling the cops 3 or 4 times. She was really worried that he was going to do something else. After all, he didn't know where she lived. That was a couple years ago. I haven't heard from Steven in a long time. I'm still friends with Brittany, and she said that she hasn't had an incident with him. Looking back, it was a real eye-opener for me. I didn't realize you could spend so much time playing video games with someone and not even realize what a freak they really were. I've been single for a really long time. The last boyfriend I had was a lot younger than me and might be one of the least intimidating guys in the world. You see, I had a really horrible experience when I was younger. I was in 8th grade at the time, actually, and there were older boys who rode on our bus. They were in high school. Part of me always knew they were bad news, but I thought they were mostly harmless. Oh, how wrong I was about that one. Let me back up for a minute. I was your typical overachiever. I came from an African American family. My parents worked incredibly hard to provide a good life for me. I was an only child, and they wanted nothing more in life than to see me succeed. And I really did my best. I was part of a bunch of clubs, got good grades, the whole 9 yards. But part of being that kind of kid meant I didn't have a lot of time for friends or a social life. I don't know what I expected the social life of a middle schooler to be. But whatever I had wasn't cutting it for me. I only really had 3 friends. One of them was my cousin who lived in another state, and the other 2 went to my school. One of them was on the chess team with me, and the other on my bus. I was chatting with my friend on the bus one day riding home from school. Like I said earlier, there were those boys. They sat in the back. They didn't really bother anyone, but they gave off a certain feeling that made you feel intimidated in some way. Not sure I can explain it beyond that. Well, toward the middle of the school year, they started getting really flirty with me. Whenever I saw them around, they would compliment me. And I won't lie to you, I loved the attention. Having guys show an interest in me felt so good. I know I was young, but I so desperately wanted to expand my horizons in that part of my life. One of them eventually got my number, and we started talking. He invited me to a small party where those guys and a few other people were getting together. I normally would have said no. There's too much to do most of the time. But it happened to be on a day where we had a lot of snow, and school was closed, and it probably would be for the next few days. They even offered to pick me up. I asked my parents about it, and they said I could go so long as I brought my phone and kept in contact with them. It was actually really fun. I had a really good time at that party, and I felt like the center of the room the whole time. I was the only girl there, and they all flirted with me. During that winter, I started spending more and more time with them. My friend from the bus encouraged me. I felt a little weird being the only 8th grade girl among a group of high school guys. I was young. I didn't think anything of it. As weird as it was, I had a good time. Very early on, they started trying to get me to drink alcohol. Of course, I didn't tell my parents about that part. I also didn't tell them they were all older than me. From a practical standpoint, these were some bad people to be hanging out with, but I never gave in. I told them that I was too young to try, and they didn't force me or make me feel bad about it either. They respected my decision. I remember one Friday night. I actually think it was night that started winter break. I had just gotten my grades back for the first half of the school year, and I had over a 4.0. My parents were so proud. I was hanging out with those older guys, and they were all drinking a lot of beer. It must have been around 6. That was normally around the time I went home. But my parents texted me and said that I could stay out late that night if I wanted to as a reward for doing so good in school. One of them started getting really drunk, though. His name was Tyler. That was when he did something a little unusual. He offered to give me some Kool-Aid. I don't think he was being racist, but that was the only thing they had available. And since everyone else was drinking beer, it was the only thing that I could drink that wasn't alcohol. I said yes because it honestly wasn't that bad. Also, I loved that lemonade-flavored Kool-Aid. Favorite thing in the world. Or it was, at least. I remember him giving it to me and looking at me in a weird way. When I drank it, it tasted fine. But a little while later, I started getting really lightheaded. And at a certain point, I passed out. I don't really know what was in that drink, but the only thing I know is that I woke up at 9. I was almost completely naked except for a bra, and my body felt weird. And it felt weird in exactly the ways you would expect. We mostly hung out in one of their basements. It was a really big area, and there was another room beside the basement. That was normally where people would put their coats and stuff. I was in that other room. I ran back into the main area of the basement and started screaming at them. I was so mortified and felt so betrayed. How could they do this to me? They started teasing me and saying that I was Tyler's girlfriend. I had like 100 text messages and phone calls from my parents. I really didn't want to stress out my parents any more than they already were. I kept asking the guys where my clothes were, but they wouldn't tell me. Tyler said that if I gave him a kiss that he would give them to me, but I was honestly disgusted at that point. And I was standing there in tears, begging for my clothes from guys who were 4 years older than me. Finally, I gave up and just started to leave. I just needed to be home at that moment. I was not okay, and that was probably the worst experience of my life. I had to walk home almost completely naked while it was snowing outside. I didn't have any panties on. Luckily, I could put my jacket from the other room around my legs, and it covered that part of me up. It was a little awkward wearing my coat that way, but it prevented anyone else from seeing my bottom half. When I got home, my parents were obviously shocked. They kept asking me who had done this to me, but I wouldn't tell them. I felt so ashamed. I kept telling them that I just wanted it to be over and you forget it. I told them that I was okay, and I was never going to see those people ever again. I remember my father holding me in his arms for a long time. I really needed that. Eventually, I showered and got ready for bed. I thought that I was going to be able to just forget that night. But of course, it's never that easy. It was only a few hours after I got home that Tyler started texting me. He said that he had naked pictures of me and he was going to send them to everyone in the school. Of course, I told them not to, but he said the only way he wouldn't was if I sent him nudes. And this began the creepiest and most humiliating phase of my life. That creep sent me disturbing pictures and videos they had taken while I was passed out. They did things I really cannot talk about, ever. Just know that they were horrible. And Tyler said that he was going to let the world see them if I didn't send him even more. Tyler began stalking me. He texted me all the time. He went full predator mode. And the worst part was that I couldn't even tell my parents. I thought they would disown me if they saw those videos or pictures. I felt completely helpless. Of course, I now know that I should have said something that night, the night I got home. But I didn't, and the abuse continued for way longer than it should have. It was around February that I finally had enough. Tyler kept asking me for creepy pictures, and I was tired of sending them to him. I just couldn't do it anymore. I decided to do something about it. I asked one of my favorite teachers for advice on what I should do. She was extremely supportive and got the situation resolved. We filed a police report and did everything we could. Thankfully, there was a lot of proof over text messages. The boys basically faced a serious criminal threat if any of those pictures ever went out to the world. And the important part was that I don't think my parents ever saw them. I know they would have been so ashamed of me, and I didn't want to let them down. It's been a long time since this experience, and it's really shaped me into who I am today. It's why I haven't really dated much, and it's also why I hate winter. I'll always remember the cold snow touching my bare back as I walked home that night. I haven't kept up with what happened to any of them, but I can't imagine it's good. I have a really horrible story from my past. It makes me feel really uncomfortable, and this is probably the only way I can never really tell anyone about it. I had your typical, big, happy family. Everyone loved each other, and everything was really good. Lots of aunts, uncles, cousins, and especially people your own age. There were probably about 30 of us, and we all spent a lot of time together, and we were all really close. However, not everyone in the family was a good egg. And here comes my Uncle Ron. He hadn't been in the picture for a long time because he was in prison. I didn't know what he was in prison for at that time. I was young after all. Kids shouldn't know that kind of stuff. He was always kind of the family mess up, and everyone tried their best to help him. But from what I've heard, he just didn't want to help himself. People would give him a place to stay, and he would do drugs on the couch. People would try to get him a job, and he would steal stuff while working. That's the kind of person he was. He was getting out of prison right after Christmas. It was really cold. We live in a really cold area, and winters are particularly harsh. So it would have just been a little inhumane to let him fend for himself. Everyone knew that if someone didn't give him a place to stay, he would probably end up back in the system or dead. And as frustrated as everyone was with him, no one wanted to see that. Everyone wanted him to succeed. The adults, at least. But I was a kid, and I didn't really understand the situation. I was only 13 at the time, but that didn't stop him from giving me some creepy looks. I hit puberty young and already had the body of a young woman, if you know what I mean. I remember him coming over one day when he had first got out. My dad was going to clear out a place for him to sleep in our shed. Our house really was not that big, but if he cleared out some tools and whatnot, there was definitely a good amount of space in the shed for him to stay. Not the most ideal, but it did have electricity and a little space heater. Heck, it was a free place to stay. Hard to argue with him. It wasn't like my dad forced him to stay out there all the time, just to sleep there. I think my dad was trying to protect me and my brother from seeing Uncle Ron high on the couch. About 2 weeks went by, and he seemed like he was changing. He was going for runs and applying to jobs. My dad also seemed impressed. I remember him saying that Ron seemed like he was getting his life together. It wasn't long before he had a steady job, and he had some money to spend. One of the first things he did was buy a cell phone, and I remember him asking me to help set it up. Of course, I was more than willing to help, especially being a kid. Technology is one of the only ways I could have helped anyone, and I was excited to do so. He bought a really cheap flip phone, and it really wasn't all that difficult to set up. I almost questioned why he needed help at all. I remember a few minutes after we were messing around with some of the features, he took a picture of me thinking that I wasn't looking. I definitely noticed him take the picture. It was very obvious. That whole situation made me feel really uncomfortable. I didn't really know how to confront him about it, though. At the time, I convinced myself that he had just accidentally taken the picture by mistake, and he deleted it right after. Despite having a job, he still had a lot of time to hang out and play around. I remember he specifically played with me and my brother a lot, But here's the weird thing that he did. He bought my brother a new gaming console. That must have been at least $300 or $400. He didn't get me anything though. So whenever he wanted to play with us kids, my brother just ended up playing video games. He was hooked on that thing. I think it was an Xbox, so that just left me and Uncle Ron to play alone. And that was when we started playing a new game. We would fake wrestle, or maybe play wrestle. I'm sure you know what I mean. When you're a kid and you wrestle an adult, and they kinda let you have a chance even though you know they are way stronger than you. Anyway, we started doing that, and it was one particular day that we were play wrestling. And my dad walked in, he got home early from work, and the second that he walked in, he started yelling at Ron. He told me to go to my bedroom and I heard some more yelling. I didn't see Ron the rest of the day. And the very next day, my dad told me that Uncle Ron has to go on a business trip. I haven't seen Uncle Ron or heard anything about him since that incident, but my dad did fill me in on some important information. The thing he had originally been in jail for was sleeping with an underage girl. I guess Ron had claimed that he thought she was 18, and it was just a big misunderstanding. Of course, the family believed him and just excused it as if it was an honest mistake. My dad told me that when he saw him wrestling with me, he didn't believe that story any longer. And that was the second he kicked Ron out of our life for good. Like I said, I don't know where he has been or what he's been up to, but I guess threatening the safety his kids finally got my dad to cut ties for good. Hi guys, and I hope you all really enjoyed these stories. And if you want to show that holiday spirit, then please press that subscribe button to always get notified of any new Scary Stories video by the channel. Also, if you have a story that you would like to have narrated, then please go to r/paranormal_side to submit your story. Happy holidays to you and all a new year.